I can take positive and negative numbers and plot them on a number line. On your screen, you see a horizontal number line. Whenever I am plotting numbers that include positive and negative numbers, I'm going to put 0 in the middle of my number line. To the right of 0, my numbers are going to increase, so they are going to be positive values. To the left of 0, my numbers will decrease. These numbers will show my negative values. When you look at your screen, you see the change in rainfall for 5 different cities. We are going to represent these as integers and then plot those on our number line. Atlanta saw an increase of 2 inches, which means Atlanta, because it increased, had a positive change of 2. To put this on my number line, I would start at 0, and because it's positive, I would move 2 units to the right, and I would place my point, and I'm going to label this for Atlanta. Portland had a decrease of 3 inches. Because the rainfall in Portland decreased by 3 inches, that is a negative change of 3. To find that on the number line, I would start at 0, and because it's negative, I know that I'm going to need to move left 3 units, and that places me at -3 on my number line. Next, I see that Chicago has an increase of 4 inches. Because it increases, that is a change of +4. To get to +4 on the number line, I know that I need to move 4 units to the right. Miami has a decrease of 6 inches. Because it decreased, that is going to be a negative change, so I'm going to represent that number with -6. To get to that number, I would move 6 units to the left of 0 on my number line. Finally, I see that in Baltimore, the rainfall did not change. If the rainfall did not increase or decrease and instead stayed the same, then the amount of change for Baltimore is 0. 0 is one of those tricky numbers because it's not positive and it's not negative. It is its own entity. So 0 is neutral, and we would place it right here in the middle of our number line. By looking at my number line, I can compare the change in rainfall for my different cities. The low temperature for 4 cities were recorded one day in January. We are going to plot these temperatures on the number line. You'll notice that the number line we're using this time is a vertical number line. When we have a vertical number line, we're going to start with 0 in the middle, and then to get to our positive numbers, we are going to move up. To get to our negative numbers, we will move down from 0. We see that New York City had a temperature of 2 degrees above 0. Because that temperature is above 0, that is going to be a positive 2 degrees. To get to 2 degrees on my number line, I would start at 0, and because it's positive, I would move up 2 units, and this would represent New York City. Denver has a temperature of 1 degree below 0. Because this temperature is below 0, I'm going to use -1 to represent it. To get to -1, I would start at 0, and because it's negative, I'm going to move down 1 unit from 0. This number, -1, is going to represent Denver's low temperature. Boston has a temperature of 3 degrees below 0. Because it is below 0, I know that -3 will represent that temperature. To get to -3, I'm going to move down 3 from 0, and that puts me at -3 on my number line. Finally, I see that Cape Cod had a temperature of 0 degrees, so that's going to be right here in the middle at 0. Now, looking at my number line, I can compare these temperatures. I can see that New York is the highest on my vertical number line, which means New York has the greatest temperature. Or when we're talking about temperatures, that would mean that New York has the warmest temperature of these 4 cities. I see that Boston is the lowest on my number line, so Boston has the lowest or coldest temperature. I can compare Boston to Denver, and Denver has a temperature of -1, while Boston has a temperature of -3. Because Denver is higher than Boston on my number line, I can say that Denver, -1 degree, is warmer than Boston's -3 degree temperature. These values represent the changes in bank accounts for 4 people last week. I see that Emily withdrew $10, and I know that a withdrawal means that I am removing money from a bank account. So this means that Emily's bank account had a negative change of $10. You see that we have a horizontal number line again. So to get to -10, if we started at 0, we would move left 10 units to arrive at -10. So we would plot our point and label it for Emily. Journey had a deposit of $8.50. I know that if we're depositing money, our bank account is increasing. So Journey's bank account will increase by $8.50. Now you'll notice that we don't have decimals on our number line, but it doesn't matter because we know that $8.50 would be located between 8 and 9 on our number line. So I would move right 8, and I know that it's going to be right here in between 8 and 9. Truk had no change in their bank account. Because the bank account did not change, we're going to use the number 0 to represent the change in the account. So I'm going to go to 0 and put my point and label this with Truk. Lynn had a withdrawal of $5.25, and we know that a withdrawal means that the amount in the bank account will decrease, so that is a negative change of $5.25. Now, when we're working with decimals, with negative numbers, we need to be very careful. My best advice is to think about this as a positive number. If I had $5.25, what 2 positive numbers would that be between? I know that it's more than 5, but less than 6, so I know that it would be located between 5 and 6 on my number line. Well, it's the same thing for if it's negative. I know that it's going to be located between -5 and -6 because it's a little past 5 on the number line, but it's not quite to 6. So I'm going to place this right here, and I'm going to label it with Lynn's name. Finally, I see that Martha keeps track of the change in weight of dogs at the animal shelter. We are going to plot those changes on the number line. You see that I have a vertical number line again, so 0 is in the middle, my positive numbers go up, and my negative numbers go down. Fido has a loss of 2 1/3 pounds. Because Fido loses weight, I know that a negative number is going to represent this value, so I'm going to represent this by -2 1/3. Now, if I'm going to put this on the number line, because it's negative, I know that I'm going to move down. But where should that go? Again, if I think about 2 1/3 in terms of positive numbers, if I were plotting positive 2 1/3, I know that I would go up to 2, but I wouldn't quite be there. And if I got all the way up to 3, then I would have passed 2 1/3. So 2 1/3 would be somewhere between 2 and 3. That means that if I go -2 1/3, that -2 1/3 will be located between -2 and -3 on my number line. So -2 1/3 would be approximately here on my number line. I see that Spot had a gain of 3 3/4 pounds. Because he gained weight, we're going to use a positive 3 3/4 to represent this value. Because it is positive 3 3/4, I know that I would go up 3, but I wouldn't quite be there, so I would need to go up another 3/4. I know that 3/4 is more than half, so I would go up a little bit further, and it should be closer to 4 than it is to 3. Tug had a constant weight, which means his weight didn't change. Since his weight didn't change, I can use 0 to represent the change. Finally, I see that Casper had a loss of 1/2 pound. So because Casper lost half a pound, the number that I'm going to use to represent that is negative 1/2. I know that if I were looking at 1/2 positive, that would be located between 0 and 1. That means that negative 1/2 will also be located between 0 and 1, except that it's going to be located between 0 and negative 1. And since it's 1/2, we know that it's going to be located exactly halfway between 0 and negative 1.